So, good morning, everybody. I'm Dr. Sunita Nareddy. I'm an infectious disease physician at Apollo Hospitals, Hyderabad. We have patients with COVID from March 2020, and we have a system where we have a unit taking care of patients with COVID, and we're also taking care of patients post COVID who have complications after treatment for COVID. There is a chat option available. Please use this chat option to answer the poll questions, and any questions that you have, please put in the question and answer section and request all of the participants to participate in the poll. Okay. Almost a year since the world got to know about COVID, because it was January last year that we got to know about COVID. Initially, we thought it's just another viral infection and it will go away. And later, we were proved that it's more than a viral infection, and there are a lot of other complications that COVID brings about with it. And if you look at the data that we have in terms of the number of corona cases in the country, this is data from today. You can see that most of our cases in India probably started somewhere in March, but really peaked in June and went between July, August, and September. We had a huge number of cases, and now we are in a downturn. So this is good for us, but it's also a time for us to be cautious, because this is the time when you start worrying about a second wave that comes in. If you look at the number of deaths also, it kind of almost mimics the same data. So why is it that we worry about COVID? There is one thing about COVID, because COVID is a disease that spreads very easily, but it also causes a lot of problems, in the sense a small number of people who have COVID develop a severe disease. That we knew almost from the beginning that yes, about 10 to 15. Now, what is the meaning of all of these? They're all different terms used by various people to call the same problem. Basically, it means there are persistent symptoms after recovering from their initial illness. How often does this happen? Approximately 10 to 15% of the people, and sometimes even up to 20% of the people, experience prolonged illness after COVID. So, what are the common symptoms? The common symptoms that we see in fatigue, cough, headache, body aches, fever, and believe me, a lot of the symptoms are occurring not just in the US. In India, a lot of people have these symptoms, including a lot of my colleagues and in doctor colleagues have symptoms as long as 3 to 4 months. People have fever that go on, or they have fatigue that continue, loss of taste, loss of smell, diarrhea, difficulty concentrating, or what's called as a brain fog, impaired memory, and loss of taste and smell can occur for a long duration of time. So all of these symptoms can occur for prolonged period of time. How long is a question that we don't know. Most people get better in about 6 weeks, but I've had colleagues who have had symptoms for up to 3 months as well. And when some of them call me and say, okay, I'll just monitor you, you're my guinea pig, we'll see how things go by. So what is the reason why some people are affected? Again, that is a question that we don't have answers to. Some risk factors seem to be present, because of which some people develop this long COVID syndrome. Some of them are high blood pressure, obesity, mental health condition, but it is really not very clear. Okay. Why is that people develop this problem? Is it like a persistent viremia that is present because of poor antibody response? Is it a relapse or a reinfection? Is it inflammatory or immune reactions, deconditioning, mental stress factors like post-traumatic stress disorder? We don't know. But we do know that even in the previous uh, coronaviral infections, like the original SARS or the MERS infection also, they have described long-term respiratory, musculoskeletal, and neuropsychiatric sequelae. And is this something similar to that? And a lot of these things are still being evaluated, and we do need answers to these questions. So we do know that COVID affects multiple parts of the body. For example, if people are in the ICU, they get really sick, they can have something called a cytokine storm, they can have lung injury. There's a lot of inflammation going on. And these are probably contributed to some of the other risk factors. For example, for some of these problems can be just other comorbidities, increasing age. Male seems to be having a little bit more severe disease. Obesity seems to be playing a role. Cancer seems to be playing a role. But we see that the disease affects multiple parts of the body, including the heart, where it causes damage to the heart muscle and causes heart failure, what we call as myocarditis. It causes damage to the lungs and causes a restrictive lung failure. It can cause damage to the brain, which we all know about loss of smell, loss of taste. We also know about it causing increased blood clotting that can affect the blood vessels in the lungs as well as blood vessels in the heart or in the brain, and memory problems. Anxiety seems to be one fairly common problem, including other problems like depression or sleep disturbances. Some people behave like it's a post-traumatic stress disorder. Joint pains, fatigue. Fatigue seems to be very, very common. So let me stop here and see if you have any questions, or if you can take a poll at this point. So the poll question for you is, how long does the immunity last post-COVID infection? How long does the immunity last post-COVID infection? So the options are there in your screen. Is it 2 weeks, 3 months, or many years, or none of the above? So the answer is probably 3 months, but we really don't know. Most coronaviral infections seems to be, at least if you look at the other coronaviruses infections that we see in the world, they seem to be having some amount of immunity for a couple of weeks to months, and after that the immunity wanes off and there is a risk of development of infection again. So the belief is that this is probably a few months, but again, this is something that we will know with time. I will go on to continue with the presentation at this point to evaluate for long COVID. So if you can see this one a little, so most people, when we call COVID, when a person has symptoms for 3 weeks or more after the COVID onset, and the symptoms, as we talked about, can be fatigue, fever, weakness, joint pains, loss of smell, and so on. So if you go to the doctor, what is the things that the doctor would do? They will evaluate you for to see what your problems are. They will take a complete history. They will see what your symptoms are and ask specific questions regarding your symptoms, and then evaluate your temperature, heart rate, blood pressure, do a respiratory exam, see where your functional status is, look at your oxygen saturations. If required, they will do additional blood tests. Again, that's as required to look for problems like, is there any blood clot in the lungs, or is there a problem to the heart? Is there elevation of the inflammatory markers, and so on. They look for other comorbidities and look for other social and financial issues that may be playing a role, and so on. And then the next thing they will have to do is assess you for what exactly to do at this point. There are things that can be done on a daily basis at home also. For example, monitoring your oxygen saturations can be done at home. Paying attention to general health, for example, quitting smoking, very, very, very important, because this disease, as we know, affects the lungs. And if you add more insult to the lungs, it will become a problem. So, yes, quitting smoking is useful. Limiting alcohol intake is definitely helpful. Avoiding caffeine is also very useful. And rest and relaxation, very, very important. At home, these are some of the things that each of us can do. And self-pacing and gradual increase in exercise as tolerated. Now, this is very, very important, as tolerated. You don't want to do it too much. While you're doing this, you have to make sure the heart rate and the oxygen saturations, blood pressure are all monitored as well. And set achievable targets. Don't aim too high, don't aim too low. And what are the other things that the doctor would suggest? If you have fever, maybe treating with paracetamol. Optimize whatever long-term conditions. For example, if you have diabetes, obviously we know that COVID seems to be playing a lot of problems with diabetes. It seems to be affecting the pancreas, which causes diabetes, and then where sugars are going out of control. Looking for other problems that can happen. For example, we have noticed that there's a lot of fungal infections post-COVID. So the doctor may be evaluating for other conditions like that. There are lung problems and heart problems that can occur. So if there are any complications, treatment for all of those. And of course, paying attention to what the patient who is suffering has, and listening and empathy is very, very important. If there is a secondary infection, which seems to be not an uncommon problem in this condition, treating those conditions. So these are some of the things that the doctor may do. It requires a multidisciplinary approach. For most of the things that we need to take care of post-COVID, it may require a lot of things, support system from other departments. For example, if you're in the hospital, it's usually the respiratory doctor, lung doctors, ICU doctors, acute rehab teams that will probably be taking care of. And they will be taking support from other departments like physiotherapy, speech and language therapy to help with, for example, if somebody is on the ventilator, tracheostomy, what to do, what kind of nutrition to give, how to get back to life, how to address fatigue, how to get back into vocational mode. All of these things will be addressed in the hospital. Psychological support by psychiatrist or psychologist is very, very crucial because there seems to be a lot of mental health issues associated with the disease. A multi-system approach by the physician will be required. So all of these components have to be taken care of in the hospital as well as at home. And remember, this post-COVID disease doesn't necessarily occur only in the people who have who are very, very sick. It can occur for somebody who's mild and who's probably not been in the hospital at all. So it can occur to somebody who's sick and who's been in the hospital for days or weeks together. Spectrum that it doesn't affect. So a mild or a severe disease, both can have problems post-COVID. So basically anybody with COVID can have problems. So I will stop here again. We'll do the next poll. So the next poll question, so is CT scan important post-recovery from COVID? Your options are yes or no. So now, should everybody with the COVID get a CT scan? This is something that seemed to be a concern for a lot of people who are having COVID. So it's not really that everybody who has COVID needs a CT scan. Yes, CT scan is useful in a lot of cases, but if the disease is mild and you're asymptomatic, we can go with what is happening clinically. But if there is shortness of breath or if the oxygen level is dropping, it definitely helps to have an objective evidence as to what is happening. CT scan is useful in a lot of other conditions. For example, if there's a blood clot in the lung, it can help you. If there's a secondary infection, either a bacterial or a fungal infection, we have seen a lot of people with COVID fungal infections after COVID. So in these kind of conditions, CT scan is definitely helpful. Or if you're having a significant disease with COVID itself, again, to get an objective assessment to see how it is and to follow up and see whether it's improving or not. And if you have shortness of breath, if the oxygen levels are dropping, if the heart rate is increasing. So we'll go back to the presentation. We do know that rehabilitation makes a huge difference in the outcomes, particularly in severe cases in the hospital, but also in the relatively mild to moderate cases. What are the things that will be done? What are the problems that we see in severe cases? There is impaired lung function. There is deconditioning and muscle weakness that develops just because of the severe illness. There can be delirium or cognitive impairment. For example, you may not be cognitively as functional as you would be in the past. Or there may be difficulty swallowing or difficulty with communication, mental health disorders, psychological support needs. All of these things are something that we look for in the hospital. How do we evaluate when to do? See, the thing we have to remember is to avoid aggravating respiratory distress or dispersing the virus unnecessarily, we have to do rehab, but you should not do respiratory rehab too early because then you're risking the person itself. It should ideally begin a little bit after you settle down in the post-acute phase, the respiratory rehabilitation. Care must be taken to avoid overloading the respiratory system and causing distress because the system is already in a stressful situation, causing more difficulties to the heart. And at this point, you don't want to stress the heart too much. And while you're doing therapy, things that we need to monitor are, is there shortness of breath? Is there a decrease in oxygen levels? Is the blood pressure going up? Is the heart rate going up? Is the temperature going up? Is there very easy fatigability? And look for symptoms: chest pain, cough, blood vision, dizziness, heart palpitation, sweating. Is there a loss of balance? Is there increasing headache? Some of these things that you want to look for during the therapy so that you don't cause damage by the therapy itself. What are the components that we use while we are doing rehab? We talk about training the respiratory muscles with the positive expiratory pressure devices like an incentive spirometer. Teaching cough exercises. Diaphragmatic training is extremely very important because here your respiratory muscles itself are weak and we have to train the other muscles that support the lung, which normally may not work as actively. And chest stretching, pursed lip breathing. These are some of the techniques that the therapist would be using. At the same time, not just the lungs, we have to take care of the rest of the body as well. Look for a functional assessment of the muscle joint range of motion of the joints, muscles testing. Is there a problem with the balance? And also assess how much can somebody tolerate. For that, there's something called a 6-minute walk test where you make some the person who is having trouble walk for a couple of minutes, monitor the oxygen saturations and see if they're tolerating it, and so on. Then we try to mobilize people early. Okay, like for example, if somebody is in the hospital in the bed, just changing the position of the person in the bed itself, making them sit first and then going on to stand. Just simple exercises in the bed, like stretching and exercises, trying to get them to do their activities of daily living. Okay, so when doing all of this, you have to consider the respiratory and the blood pressure, heart rate, and so on. We also try to do limb exercises and then muscle strengthening. And we also try to do aerobic conditioning. For example, just walking or muscle strengthening by doing cycle, legs and arm ergometry. Basically something like in a cross trainer, which you can do at home to strengthen both your upper and lower limbs. Because again, all of this is required to even strengthen your lungs. And you try to gradually increase your exercise time. You may start much lower, but slowly try to increase the time. So now we will move on to question and answer session. Let me see what are the questions that we have here from the audience at this point. When should a person end isolation and get back to routine is one of the questions we have. See, if you look at the Government of India guidelines, the recommendation is to stay in isolation for at home for about 10 days, in the room for 10 days and then at home for 7 days. This is the Government of India guidelines. If you look at the US guidelines, for example, CDC guidelines, they say for mild disease, you can isolate for 7 to 10 days. Now, why is it so? Why do we not know the exact duration of time? Because we know that viral shedding can occur for a long period of time. Even if you were to do RT-PCR, it can come positive for a prolonged period of time. So doing RT-PCR doesn't always help you. We stop doing RT-PCR to clear people from coming out from isolation. But we do know that for the most part, people will become non-infectious by about 14 days. So the Government of India guidelines right now says about 17 days. Next question that we have here is how many times is reinfection possible? Now, that is a question we really don't have an answer to at this point. That depends on, we will probably know that with due course in time. But we do know even today that we have had a lot of people come down with a second or a third infection. So just because you have had infection does not mean you're having protective antibodies. In fact, a lot of people with the mild disease or an asymptomatic infection are not even producing antibodies and they're developing a second infection. So, and even people who have antibodies sometimes do come down with a second infection, which we have seen a lot, especially in the first couple of months. We have noticed that when we screen people for COVID, they do become positive and then come back with the disease much later. The next question we have here is, will the infection make a person weak forever? Not really, or hopefully not. The infection is a problem, yes, but for the most part, it should get better with time. And the problems that we are facing are hopefully short-lived. Okay. So to conclude, I would like to add that rehabilitation is very, very important after COVID. We need to take care of a lot of issues, not just medical issues. There's a lot of sequelae that we're seeing post-viral illness, and particularly if they have a prolonged ICU stay, including mechanical ventilation, and particularly for those who have pre-existing comorbidities. So for every person that we have, we need to do a thorough assessment, and an individualized progressive treatment plan should be made based on the function disability of that particular person and how they can return to participation in society, and that hopefully will help maximize their function and quality of life.